The winding stone road led to the mansion's massive iron gates. Paula got out of the taxi with her suitcase in hand and looked at the majestic building in front of her. The mansion was imposing, with white columns supporting a classic facade, tall and detailed windows, as if each corner told an ancient story, untouched by time. As she took her first steps through the well-kept garden, she smelled the faint scent of the red roses that decorated the entrance. But as beautiful as the landscape was, a shiver ran down his spine. Something about that place felt cold. An almost disturbing silence hung in the air, broken only by the rustling of trees swaying in the wind. Paula touched the handle of the solid wooden door, and before she could even turn it, it slowly opened, creaking slightly. On the other side, the main hall revealed itself. The polished marble floor reflected the golden light from the enormous crystal chandelier, which hung from the high ceiling like a symbol of wealth and grandeur. Old paintings adorned the walls, depicting the faces of strangers with stern expressions and eyes that seemed to follow her. She took a few hesitant steps inside, feeling the echo of her own footsteps resound in the wide hall. The sophistication was undeniable, but the atmosphere exuded a strange emptiness, as if the house were more of a museum than a home. Paula sighed, gripping the strap of her bag tightly. She had accepted this job because she needed it, but something inside her told her that this mansion hid much more than its beauty let on. Paula barely had time to absorb the atmosphere when firm footsteps echoed down the hallway. Suddenly, a woman appeared before her. He must have been around 50 years old, with a face marked by time and eyes full of distrust. She wore a dark dress and a spotless white apron, typical of a governess. "Are you the new caregiver?" he asked, crossing his arms and narrowing his eyes at Paula. "Yes, my name is Paula. I was hired to take care of Mr. Hugo," she replied politely, trying to maintain a friendly tone. The woman let out a dry laugh, without a hint of humor. "Take care? Good luck, girl." Paula frowned. "Why?" The housekeeper took a step closer, lowering her voice slightly, as if she was about to reveal a dark secret. "Because he's a monster." Paula's heart gave a slight jump. "Monster?" he repeated, feeling a chill on the back of his neck. The woman pressed her lips together, as if hesitating between saying more or remaining silent. In the end, he let out a heavy sigh and muttered, "You won't last here. No one does. He always pushes them away." Paula felt a lump form in her throat, but she maintained her firm posture. She needed that job. No matter who Hugo was or what he had done, she wouldn't give up before she even started. "I can handle myself," he said, lifting his chin. The housekeeper just shook her head, giving a bitter half-smile. "We'll see." Then he pointed down a long, dark hallway. "He's in there. Good luck." Without another word, she turned and disappeared into the hall, leaving Paula alone in front of the path that led to the man who, according to her, was a monster. Paula took a deep breath and walked down the hallway indicated by the housekeeper. The walls were covered with dark silk papers and paintings of melancholy landscapes. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the echo of his own footsteps on the polished wooden floor. She stopped in front of a half-open door and knocked lightly. No answer. She decided to push it open carefully, revealing a large room, lit only by the light that entered through the tall windows. There was a huge bookcase full of books, an unlit fireplace, and, in the center, near the window, a man sitting in a wheelchair. He didn't turn around when she entered. He just kept looking outside, as if he hadn't even noticed her presence. "Mr. Hugo?" Paula called, keeping her voice firm but polite. The man let out an impatient sigh before finally turning to face her. He was young, younger than she had expected, with a face with strong and striking features. The light outlined his hard expression, and there was an air of arrogance in his gaze. "Great. Another caregiver, he said, his voice full of disdain. How long do you think it will last? A week? 2? Paola crossed her arms. That depends more on you than on me. Hugo arched an eyebrow, surprised by the direct answer. Interesting. Usually you try to flatter me or pretend to care. Let's see how long this air of bravery will last. Paola didn't look away. She knew he wanted to test her. He wanted her to show fear or insecurity, but she wouldn't give him that pleasure. I'm here to do my job, Mr. Hugo. It doesn't matter what you think. He smiled at the corner of his mouth, but there was no humor in his expression, only a silent challenge. Then let's see how far your determination will go. Paola felt that this would be a long challenge, but she wouldn't back down. Paola observed Hugo for a few seconds. He was an undeniably handsome man. His dark hair fell slightly over his forehead, his eyes were deep and intense, and his facial features were well defined. But despite his appearance, his expression carried something that dispelled any feeling of sympathy, a calculated coldness, a sharp gaze that seemed to judge her every move. He turned his chair to face her better, his long fingers tapping lightly on the armrest, as if he were impatient. "So, Paola," he said, savoring her name with a slight tone of irony, "did you come here thinking you could save me? That you would have a nice story to tell about how you helped the poor, bitter man?" Paola maintained her firm posture. "I came to do my job, Mr. Hugo. The rest is up to you." He let out a dry laugh. "Oh, you're determined, but I've seen this movie before. At first, they all come out with this bravery, this insistence on being kind and helpful, until they realize I'm beyond help." She took a deep breath. "Maybe you're used to people giving up easily, but I'm not like the others." Hugo tilted his head to the side, assessing her as if trying to find some hidden weakness in her words. Then he smiled crookedly, a smile that expressed nothing but skepticism. "Great. This is going to be fun." The provocation was clear, but Paola refused to fall for his game. She knew he would try to push her away, test her patience in every way possible, but it didn't matter. She wouldn't give up that easily. Paola crossed her arms and held Hugo's gaze. He wanted to intimidate her, to push her away with his sarcasm and disdain, but she wouldn't back down. She'd dealt with challenges in her life, and a bitter man in a wheelchair wasn't going to make her give up so easily. "Fun?" she repeated, arching an eyebrow. "Do you think testing me will make me run?" Hugo smirked, leaning his elbow on the arm of his chair and resting his face in his hand. "Most of the time, yes. Usually it only takes a few days for them to realize I'm not worth the effort." Paola took a step forward, keeping her tone firm. "If you want me to leave, you're going to have to try harder than that." "Hugo." He blinked, surprised by her answer. He expected her to flinch, to at least show some hesitation. But no. Paola was there, challenging him back. "So you're stubborn," he muttered, narrowing his eyes. "I prefer to call it persistence," she replied, with a slight smile on the corner of her lips. He let out a heavy sigh and turned his chair slightly, moving away towards the window. "Let's see how long this persistence lasts." Paola said nothing more. She just kept her posture firm. She would not give in. If Hugo wanted to push her away with harsh words, then he would need to find another strategy, because Paola was here to stay. After Hugo walked away, Paola felt a strange weight in the air. It was as if the entire mansion was impregnated with that coldness he carried. She took a deep breath and began to explore the hallways, letting her eyes roam every detail of that imposing but lifeless place. The luxurious carpets muffled the sound of her footsteps, and the antique furniture, although refined, looked more like museum pieces than part of a home. Large paintings hung on the walls, portraits of people who, by all indications, were part of Hugo's family. But there were no smiles on their faces, only austere and distant looks, as if happiness had been a forgotten concept until then. She ran her fingers over a marble table in the living room, and noticed a thin layer of dust. Despite its grandeur, the place was unlived in. There were no signs of shared moments, no signs of coziness. It was a luxurious prison. As she approached a bookshelf full of books, she noticed that many were intact, their spines showing no signs of handling. But among them, one copy seemed to have been taken out and put back in several times. She slid her finger along it and pulled out the book. The title was subtly faded by time, but when she opened it, she found a handwritten dedication. For Hugo, who will one day find his own path of light. With love, Mum. Paula felt a lump in her throat. The delicate handwriting indicated affection, a love that seemed to have been lost at some point. She closed the book carefully and looked around once more. It was obvious that mansion was a castle of solitude, a place where luxury only served to hide emptiness. When Paula returned to the main hall, she found Hugo again, now sitting near the window, watching the landscape as if the world outside was something distant and unreachable. He was absorbed, but his eyes were nothing more than two dark dots fixed on nothing. Paula approached without saying a word, feeling the atmosphere more tense than ever. "I hope you've finished your investigation, Miss Paula," Hugo said without looking at her. His voice was cold, like the weather outside the window. "Or I can get you a few more rooms to search, if that would make you feel more useful." Paula was not intimidated. "I'm just exploring the house, Hugo, but it's impossible not to notice how empty it is here." He slowly turned his chair until he was facing her, his gaze deep and arrogant. "Empty? Don't be so dramatic. That's what happens when you have everything you need: luxury, comfort, privacy." He paused, his smile stretching ever so slightly, as if he was amused by her reaction. "Of course, it must be difficult for someone like you to understand." "I understand more than you know," Paula replied firmly, moving a little closer. "It's not the luxury that impresses me, Hugo. It's what's missing. This place feels more like a prison than a home." Hugo gave a sarcastic laugh, looking at her with a disdainful gaze. "A prison, you say? You think I care what people like you think about my life? I don't need advice from someone who can barely understand my reality." He was starting to lose his patience, and Paula knew it. But instead of being shaken, she stood her ground. Hugo was just trying to push her away with his cutting words. He wanted her to feel small, insignificant, but he couldn't. "Maybe I don't understand everything about you, Hugo," Paula said calmly. "But I understand enough to know that no one lives like this without a price to pay. This loneliness you value so much is killing you inside." Hugo was silent for a moment, his eyes now more fixed on her, as if he was evaluating her words. But soon he walked away again, turning his chair to face the window again. "I prefer my silence, Paula. And you will learn that no matter what you do, it will always be my best companion." Paula stood there for a few more seconds, not knowing what to say. But unlike him, she didn't walk away. She stood there in his presence, silent but determined. If she was going to help him, she would have to break through that shell of arrogance, and for that it would take more than just words. As Paula walked through the mansion, her curiosity guided her through little explored corridors. As she walked, away from the main room, she entered a more secluded area of the house, where the walls, decorated with ancient tapestries, seemed to tell forgotten stories. It was then that his eyes fixed on something that, despite the time and dust, seemed to beg to be noticed. A grand piano, covered in a thick layer of dust, was leaning against a shadowy corner. The delicacy of its design was still evident despite the wear. Paula approached, her hand gently touching the surface of the instrument. Dust rose into the air like a mist, revealing the soft glow of the piano, which, although neglected, still seemed to possess a unique beauty. Without thinking, she sat down on the bench and placed her hands on the keys, feeling the weight of the moment. A part of her knew that it had a history, but she could not fully understand what made it so special. As her hands touched a few random keys, a soft yet dissonant music began to fill the air. The melody was interrupted when a deep voice, but filled with a different tone, interrupted her. "I didn't know you played the piano," Hugo said, watching her with a look that mixed curiosity and a hint of something deeper. Paula turned quickly, surprised by Hugo's presence, but at the same time not feeling intimidated. "I don't play. I was just trying to understand what there is in this instrument, what it represents." Hugo slowly approached, his eyes softly fixed on the piano. "This piano, it belonged to my mother. She was a talented pianist. She said that music was the only thing that could touch her deeply, but after she passed away, the piano stayed here, and I let it fall silent, like everything that remained after her." Hugo's voice, usually so firm and sarcastic, sounded different now. There was a vulnerability in his words, as if he were revealing a part of himself that he rarely let out. Paula felt a wave of compassion invade her chest, but also a sense of deep sadness in Hugo's gaze. The mansion, so large and imposing, seemed to have swallowed up everything that was good. He was surrounded by luxury, but lifeless. "I can imagine how hard it must have been for you," Paula said softly, recognizing the pain he was trying to hide behind his harsh posture. Hugo looked at her with a sad smile, but said nothing for a moment. His gaze was lost, as if he were trapped in memories of a distant time when music and his mother's love had filled his life. "She used to tell me that music could heal any wound, but I could never find solace in it." "Silence became my only friend," he confessed, more to himself than to Paula. Paula fell silent, realizing how much he was still trapped in the past, in the suffering and loss. She didn't know what to say to ease his pain, but she felt that perhaps at that moment her presence was enough. She got up from the piano and walked over to him, placing her hand gently on Hugo's shoulder. "Maybe it's time to let the piano speak for you, Hugo. Maybe, in the sound of the keys, you can find something that's been lost for a long time." Hugo looked at her hand. For a moment, his gaze softer, almost thoughtful. He didn't respond, but something in that gesture touched a vulnerable spot in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, music could still give him something he didn't know he needed. The sound of water hitting the walls of the shower was constant and soothing, but the atmosphere in the bathroom was far from peaceful. Paula was nervous. She had never imagined that one day she would have to take care of someone this way, especially Hugo, that man who seemed so distant and insensitive. But here she was, with a heavy heart, preparing to bathe someone who seemed to have everything, but who carried an invisible weight that she didn't fully understand. Hugo was sitting in the wheelchair next to the bathtub, his eyes fixed on nothing. The silence between them was tense, and Paula felt that at any moment he might fire off one of his sarcastic words, but he remained silent. She prepared the water, testing the temperature, and did her best to show her composure. But her nervousness was visible. "You can start," he said, his voice cold, emotionless, as if the act of taking care of oneself was an obligation and not something personal. Paola approached slowly, her hands trembling as she held the loofah and soap. The warm water began to run over Hugo's skin, and the tension of the moment seemed to increase. He was completely still, his eyes fixed on some distant point, as if he were in another world. With each movement Paola made, she felt the weight of his gaze on her, but also the pain that was hidden behind his cold demeanor. As she ran the loofah over Hugo's back, something caught her attention. Between Hugo's attention to his skin and the uncomfortable silence, Paula noticed something that shouldn't have escaped her watchful gaze. Dark marks, old, deep burns. They were large and irregular, spreading across his back and shoulders. She paused for a moment, feeling the weight of it. Those marks weren't just physical scars. They seemed to represent a much greater pain, something he never wanted to share. With her heart racing, Paula looked at Hugo, trying to gauge if he was aware that she had noticed. She wanted to ask, wanted to know what had caused those scars, but a part of her knew he would probably refuse to talk about it. What to do? How to deal with his silent pain? Hugo! Paula began, her voice soft, hesitant. These marks, can I help you with them? Hugo didn't move. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed, but it seemed like he was fighting something inside himself. His expression was hard, but it wasn't like it used to be. There was a vulnerability there, hidden behind the arrogant facade he wore so well. You don't have to worry about that, he said finally, his tone almost bored. They're scars from my past. There's nothing more to say. Paula felt a lump in her throat, but she knew she shouldn't insist. Hugo had made himself clear. He wasn't ready to face what was hidden inside him. She continued to bathe him, trying to ignore the pain she felt at the sight of those scars, but the silence between them became unbearable. When she was done, she carefully dried him with the towel without saying anything else. Hugo didn't move, remaining still, silent, as if he were trapped in a place where the past constantly haunted him. "If you need anything, I'm here," Paula said, her voice soft, still trying to find some way to connect with him, but Hugo didn't respond. He just nodded, not looking at her, as if he was trying to keep the necessary distance. Paula left the bathroom, feeling that the weight of that moment would follow her for a long time. She knew there was more to that man than he was willing to show, but she also knew that he would not allow anyone to enter his world, and perhaps the pain he hid was more than she could bear. But she also knew that somehow she would not give up trying. The silence between Paula and Hugo seemed thick, as if an invisible wall had been erected between them, made of unspoken words and unshared feelings. But in that moment, as Paula arranged things in the room and tried to remain calm in the face of Hugo's coldness, she felt that perhaps it was time to open up. She knew he would not be easy to reach, but she felt an urgent need to tell her own story, to show him that she was not just someone hired to take care of his injuries. She had a life, a reason, something much bigger at stake. Paula was organizing some clothes on the bedside table when out of nowhere she spoke, her voice breaking the tense silence of the room. I need this job, Hugo." He didn't answer right away, but his posture changed slightly. He remained silent, his eyes still focused on the screen of his cell phone, but Paula could tell he was paying attention. His curiosity, even if minimal, was beginning to emerge, like a timid spark trying to ignite in the midst of a field of indifference. "My mother is sick," she continued, each word coming out with a weight, as if she were lifting a burden off her shoulders. "She has cancer, and I'm the only one who can take care of her." Paula paused for a moment, feeling Hugo's gaze on her, as if he were finally getting closer, in a very subtle way to what she was saying. "I need this job to pay for her treatment. I can't leave her alone, Hugo. If I lose this job, I might lose the only chance I have to help her." Those words, full of sincerity, were not just an explanation. They were a request, a silent plea for understanding. Paula didn't know what she expected from Hugo, but somewhere deep inside, she felt that this was her chance to break down some of his resistance, to show her that, just like him, she also had her own battles, her own burdens. Hugo, who had been motionless until that moment, raised his eyes and looked at her with a more attentive but still distant look. It was as if something had changed, even if only slightly. He didn't completely get rid of his arrogant expression, but he seemed more interested, more willing to listen. "That's complicated," he said, his voice softer than usual. "You have courage, Paula. Taking care of someone who is dying while still carrying your own problems. I never knew what that was like." Paola felt a lump in her throat tighten, but she didn't look away. She knew Hugo was starting to open up, to show signs that maybe, within that shell of contempt and pain, there was room for something more. She had touched something in him, something he'd kept deep inside, but now it was starting to emerge. I can't give up on her," Paula said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "And I won't give up on helping you either, Hugo. If you'll let me." Hugo watched her silently, as if he were considering her words, as if he were seeing something in her that he didn't yet fully understand. He took a deep breath, and for the first time since he'd met her, his gaze wasn't filled with disdain or sarcasm. There was something else there, a slight curiosity, maybe even a little recognition. "You're persistent," he said, almost imperceptibly. "But don't fool yourself, Paula. I'm not easy to deal with." She smiled softly, a tired smile but full of quiet hope. "I know," she replied, "but I'm not easy to give up either." At that moment, something changed. Paula knew it wasn't a big step, but it was a step. It was a calmer day at the mansion, but the tension between Hugo and Paula was still present, albeit in a different way. They had gradually gotten used to each other's presence. Paula already knew how to deal with the daily challenges of caring for Hugo, and even in the face of difficulties, her determination never wavered. He, in turn, began to show signs that he was no longer so immune to her insistence. But that day, something even more intense would happen. Hugo was sitting in his wheelchair, his gaze distant, but his hands clenching against the armrests, as if trying to find some control. Paula, always attentive, approached with a careful look. She knew he was trying something that seemed to be very important to him. "Are you okay?" she asked, noticing the tension in Hugo's body. He never liked to admit he needed help, but she knew what he was trying to do. "I want to try to walk," he said, his voice a little lower but firm. "With your help, Paula." Paula hesitated. She knew how difficult it would be, but she also realized Hugo's need to feel like he was still capable of something. It was an internal battle for him, against the physical and emotional pain. She took a deep breath and nodded. "I'm here," she said, approaching him. "Let's go slowly." She helped Hugo stand up, with the patience of someone who understood that this was not a simple movement. Each step was an achievement, but also a fight against the limitations of his body. The floor of the mansion was cold, but it seemed that the environment around him warmed up with his attempt to overcome what seemed impossible. Hugo tried to take the first step, but the movement was abrupt. His body, weakened by lack of exercise and chronic pain, did not respond as he had hoped. His knee gave way, and in an instinctive movement he lost his balance and fell to the ground with a dull thud. Paula, terrified, tried to catch him, but he was already on the ground, his eyes closed, his face contorted in an expression of pain. I can't," he murmured, his voice broken. His tone was one of frustration, but also of deep sadness. He was trying to do more than just walk. He was trying to regain something he had lost long ago: control, independence, even the feeling of being whole again. Paula knelt beside him, concern written all over her face. She knew it would not be easy. His pain, both physical and emotional, was there, visible in every movement. He looked at her with a mixture of shame and anger, as if he were fighting not only his body, but his own destiny. "Don't worry, Hugo," Paula said, her voice soft but full of determination. "You're trying. That's a step." He didn't say anything, but the way she said it seemed to lift some of his emotional weight. Paula helped him up carefully, guiding him back to his wheelchair. Each gesture was like a reminder of Hugo's fragility, not just physically, but also of his wounded soul. "I know you want more," Paula continued, looking into his eyes. "But sometimes, Hugo, what matters isn't how many steps you take. It's the fact that you try every day, and that's what really matters." Hugo, though still silent, looked at her. There was something different in his gaze, something that Paula recognized as a small opening, a sliver of his old confidence beginning to return. She knew he was still distant, but that moment of vulnerability, of frustration and pain, was also a sign that he was beginning to trust her, that he was beginning to see that perhaps she was not just another person trying to help. "I won't give up on you, Hugo," she said with conviction, helping him settle into his wheelchair again. "I know you can get through this." Hugo looked at her with an expression that Paula never imagined she would see, a mixture of gratitude and, perhaps, a spark of hope. The mansion was silent that night, as if even the walls were immersed in a moment of reflection. The mood between Hugo and Paula had subtly changed. Although the difficulties were still present, a bond was beginning to form between them, a bond forged in small victories and in the silent understanding of their pain. Hugo, in particular, seemed more introspective than ever. He was in his wheelchair, looking out the large window that overlooked the garden, illuminated by the soft light of the moon. The cool night breeze blew through the curtains, gently swaying. Then, Paola, having finished her chores, approached him. Something about her was different that night, as if she knew something profound was about to happen. "Are you thinking about something, Hugo?" Paola asked softly. Her voice almost whispered, as if she were afraid to break the tranquility of the moment. Hugo remained silent for a long moment, staring out the window. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, filled with a sadness he rarely allowed to show. I don't know if I'm capable of love, Paola," he said, the words falling from his lips as if they were a weight too great to bear. "I look at you, I see your kindness, your patience, and I think, why would someone like you choose to stay by my side? I am a monster. All I've done is push people away, hurt those who got close. And now, with all this, am I still capable of love?" Paola, without hesitation, knelt down beside him. Her hand gently touched Hugo's arm, and for a moment the silence between them was filled only by the sound of their breathing, both of them trying to find the right words, or perhaps the right answers, to the doubts Hugo carried in his heart. "I don't believe you're a monster," she said firmly. "I see the pain in your eyes, Hugo. I see someone who has suffered a lot and because of that is afraid to open up. But that doesn't make you a monster. You're just lost, hurt, like we all have been at one time. And about love, I can't say if you'll ever be able to love again. But what I can tell you is that you deserve to be loved. You deserve to feel the true connection that's inside you, waiting to be discovered." Hugo looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of disbelief and something else. Perhaps a seed of hope, small and delicate, beginning to sprout. He had never spoken about his insecurities in this way. Always hiding behind his arrogance, he had never allowed anyone to see his vulnerability. But that night, something in him seemed to break. Something that had been bottled up for so long, locked deep inside him, began to break free. I don't know what to do with this," he said, his voice shaking. "I want to believe, Paola. I want to believe that I can change, that I can feel, but sometimes it's so hard." Paola looked at him gently, but her eyes were steady. She knew how painful Hugo's internal struggle was, because she also knew what it was like to have deep doubts about herself, about what she deserved, about her ability to surrender without fear. "You don't have to do anything now, Hugo," she said. "You don't have to know everything all at once. You just have to know that I'm here, one day at a time. We'll get through this together. And then without saying another word. Paola approached Hugo. She placed her hand gently on his face and, with a softness that seemed to counter all the pain he carried, kissed his forehead. A kiss of welcome, of acceptance, of understanding. It was the kind of kiss that conveyed more than words could ever say. It was the promise that, although the road was long and winding, they did not have to face it alone. Hugo closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the tenderness of the gesture. Something in his heart that had once seemed impenetrable was now slowly opening. Maybe love was not something lost to him. Maybe there was a chance, a small chance, that he could learn to love again, but this time with someone who really saw him, with all his scars, fears, and weaknesses. When Paola pulled away, their eyes met again. No more words were needed. Hugo finally smiled, a shy but real smile, perhaps the first true smile in years. He still had many doubts, but there was something in his gaze that said, maybe I can learn to love. Maybe I can learn to be happy again. The clock on the wall of the mansion continued its constant ticking, but at that moment, time seemed to slow down. Paola was in the living room, sorting out some documents and organizing the space, as she always did. She felt that Hugo was quieter than usual, more distant. Even after the small changes that had begun to happen between them, she knew that there was still a lot he hadn't shared. Something heavy, something he was deeply hiding, but that perhaps needed to be said. She approached him, who was sitting in his wheelchair, looking out the window, his eyes lost in the landscape. Paola could feel that something was about to happen. The tension in the air was palpable, as if Hugo was preparing to reveal something that could change everything between them. "Are you okay, Hugo?" Paola asked, her voice soft but firm, trying to reach that place inside him that she knew was so difficult to touch. Hugo didn't answer right away. He seemed to hesitate, fighting against something inside himself. Paola knew she was touching something deep, something he didn't want to face, but she wouldn't back down. He deserved to be heard. He deserved to have a space to express himself, to finally release the weight he'd been carrying alone for so long. "I don't know if I'm okay," Hugo said, his voice low, barely audible. He took a deep breath, trying to control the emotions that were about to overflow. "There's something I need to tell you, something that's been with me for a long time." Paola crouched down in front of him, her eyes fixed on his. She knew she couldn't pressure him, but she also knew it was time for Hugo to free himself, to let go of the ghosts of the past that still haunted him. "You can tell me anything, Hugo. I'm here to listen," she said calmly, her words soft but full of empathy. Hugo closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to gather the courage to speak. He had always been someone who hid behind a wall of arrogance and sarcasm, but here, in front of Paola, there was a glimpse of vulnerability that he had never shown to anyone. "When I was only 10 years old," he began, his voice lower now, almost breaking, "my parents died in a car accident. I was left alone. I didn't know what to do. I went to live with my uncle, because he was the only relative I had. At first he seemed like the only person who wanted to take care of me, but soon things started to change." Hugo paused, the pain in his expression evident. He swallowed hard, trying to control the tension that was tightening his throat. He started treating me differently. At first it was just strange looks, then touches, and then he started forcing me to do things I didn't understand. I was just a child, Paola. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it was wrong. I was so lost, so alone. I didn't know how to tell anyone, and so I started to shut myself off, to pull away from everything and everyone. I just wanted it to end. Paola felt her heart ache at hearing those words. She had always known Hugo had a dark past, but hearing the details of his pain made her feel a deep compassion for him. She sat down next to him, placing her hand gently over his. offering the comfort he had never asked for, but now desperately needed. I tried to hide it all. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't real, that I could move on, Hugo continued, his eyes now filled with unshed tears. But inside, I could never get over it. And that's what made me who I am today, Paula. This monster, this bitter person you see before you, it's me trying to protect myself, trying not to let anyone get close. Because if anyone finds out what happened, if anyone finds out, I'm scared. Hugo's words echoed in the silence of the room, filled with pain, suffering, and a deep fear of being vulnerable. Paula didn't say anything for a while, just stood there beside him, holding his hand tightly, in no rush to speak. She knew he needed space to process everything he had just revealed. "You're not a monster, Hugo," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "You are a man who has suffered greatly, who has been through a hell that no human being should have to go through. And that does not define you. What you do from now on, how you choose to heal and allow yourself to be loved, that is what will define you." Hugo looked at her, his eyes now filled with tears he had not shed in years. He did not know if he could believe her, if he could believe that it was really possible to overcome his pain. But somehow, hearing those words from Paula made a small flame of hope ignite inside him. "I don't know how to do this, Paula," he said, his voice shaking. "I don't know how to heal. I don't know if I can." "We will figure it out together," Paula replied with a soft smile. "I don't know all the answers, but I do know that you don't have to carry this weight alone. I am here, Hugo, and if you let me, I will be by your side every step of the way." At that moment, Hugo did not have all the answers, but something had changed inside him. He felt, for the first time in a long time, that there was a possibility of healing, a chance to rebuild his life. Hugo sat in a comfortable room, the walls adorned with soft paintings, and the soft light that seemed to invite him to relax. He looked at the therapist in front of him, a man with a calm and welcoming voice who offered him a safe space to express himself, something he had never had before. Over the past few weeks, he had been a regular visitor to this office, something that, at first, seemed unthinkable to him. Going to therapy was an idea that Hugo had never considered. The rich and arrogant man that he had been did not believe in weakness, much less in asking for help. But after the conversation with Paola, after opening up in a vulnerable way and finally facing his past, he felt that perhaps it was time to allow himself to heal. "How are you feeling today, Hugo?" the therapist asked, with a calmness that seemed to penetrate Hugo's soul, allowing him to breathe more deeply. Hugo looked down, his fingers fidgeting nervously. It was hard to admit, but he knew something had changed. He was no longer the arrogant man who hid behind a facade. He still struggled, but the pain didn't consume him in the same way. He wasn't as lost anymore. I'm trying, I guess," Hugo said, his voice softer than he'd imagined. "I never imagined something like this could help me. I thought it was just weakness. But I'm starting to see that maybe it's the only way to deal with everything I carry inside me." The therapist nodded understandingly. "Recognizing that you have something to learn is a big step, Hugo. And more importantly, accepting that you deserve to be healed." Those weekly meetings began to become something Hugo looked forward to. With each session, he talked more about his feelings, his fears, his insecurities. And with each conversation, he felt some of the weight he'd carried over the years begin to lift. Hugo knew he still had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had something to fight for. Hope was beginning to blossom, even if it was small and fragile. Meanwhile, Paula remained by his side, offering support he never imagined possible. She never pressured him, never forced him to say or do something he wasn't ready to do. She was just there, patient and understanding, and over time that made all the difference. He knew that his change was not just the result of the therapy, but of the strength and love she offered him every day. And finally, the day arrived. Hugo and Paula were in the garden of the mansion, in a space where the sunlight filtered gently through the trees. In their hands they held a small tree, young and fragile, with roots that needed to be cared for, just like Hugo himself. Paula smiled at him, her gaze full of understanding. Hugo, in turn, felt a sense of peace that he never imagined possible. He had never thought much about plants, about the symbolism of a tree growing, but at that moment, as he looked at the small sprout in his hands, he felt a deep connection with that image. "Just like this tree," Paula said with a soft smile. "You're starting to grow, Hugo. You're putting down roots into something new." Hugo looked at the tree, and for a moment he felt small in the face of all he still had to learn and overcome. But at the same time, he felt a surge of gratitude, of hope. He was beginning to understand the power of growth, of healing, and of patience. It wouldn't be easy, but he had Paula by his side. "I didn't know how much I needed this," Hugo said, his voice softening. "I didn't know how much life could be different. I've lost myself for so long, Paula, but now I see that I can, perhaps, start over." She looked at him, a gleam in her eyes. "That's it, Hugo. It's not about erasing the past, but about learning to live with it and still find beauty in what's to come. You're starting to create something new, and that's all that matters." Together, they dug a small hole in the ground and planted the tree, covering the roots with fresh soil. The moment was symbolic, a representation of the new beginning Hugo was creating, not only for himself, but for his life with Paula. When they were finished, Hugo looked at the tree and felt a sense of lightness. He knew the road ahead would still be challenging, but now he had a reason to keep going. The video ended with a shot of the two of them standing, looking at the tree planted in the garden. The sun beginning to set behind them, casting a soft light over the landscape. Hugo and Paula, with their hands clasped together, looked at the tree as if it were a reflection of what they had achieved together. A promise of growth, renewal, and a future full of possibilities. And so, with a simple gesture, they symbolized the beginning of something new, the beginning of a fuller life, of healing, and of love blossoming where before there had been only pain. If you were moved by this story of overcoming and transformation, leave a like and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see more inspiring stories like this one. Leave a comment with your thoughts on Hugo and Paula's journey and how you are dealing with your own challenges. Remember, every day is an opportunity to start over. Until next time.